Hello, welcome to the shed. Today's video is part 2 in using basic hand tools to create a rebate. Today we're going to be doing the rebate down the long grain of the board, and if you saw part 1 you would have seen that I intend to do mainly this dado using just a chisel. You want to make sure that your chisel is sharp to start with. I'll leave the video down below how to sharpen a chisel properly, whether that's freehand or using jigs. What we're going to be doing here is essentially mimicking that we're going to have this board in on the side here. The idea is that we want to bring this in and get it flush with the edge of this board here. So I've already gone ahead and squared off at this edge that we used when we did the dado and also the other rebate on the end in the last video. So this edge is square, so we're going to use that as our reference to mark out our rebate. So our rebate is going to be the thickness of this board, which happens to be 19 millimeters. So we're going to go ahead and use 19 millimeters on the top edge here, and this board is 19 millimeters. We're going to go in a third of that material, so we're going to go in roughly about 6 millimeters. I think it's like 6.3 millimeters, something like that, but I'm going to settle on about 6.5 millimeters. I'll leave the conversions to those markings down below for you, so if you need a quick glance, just quickly check that out, or I'll try and leave them on screen here for you. Today, I'm just going to use the measurements straight on my marking gauge. If you don't have measurements, you want to get a ruler and just mark your measurements on here. So if we look right up here, you can see just here, there's little graduations. They might be a little difficult to see. The lighting's causing a few problems, but yeah, there's little graduations for metric on that side and imperial on this side. Now, for any of you wanting, this is from Cat's Moses Tools, and I'm going to do a review on this. I did do a quick text review some while back on Instagram talking about this, but I'm going to do a video, and it's just really well made tool, and they're very cheap compared to competitors out there, and they really do a good job. So stay tuned for that review. I'm going to try and get a review out on these. So we're going to come in and I'm going to press it up against my fence here, and so up against my reference edge here, and this top edge, you want it to get nice and deep. So you want it to go down as deep as your cutting gauge will allow, and I'll show you why in a moment. Get it nice and deep there. There we go. So if you're looking here, we've got a very defined line here. I don't even need to pencil that one in. I will in a minute, just so you can get a good look at it. But there we go, that nice line. Now, for this, the depth, as I've said in the past, is about a third of the piece of wood. So what I'm going to do is just take the measurement of the rebate that I've already got on this board, which we cut in the last video, roughly a third, but I thought might as well have it match since we're trying to mimic that initial introduction board that I did here. So with this, the easiest way I find to mark this is to leave your board flat so you can hold it down, reference off your reference face, assuming this is your reference face. You want to make sure you've got a reference face for this. And do a nice light pass, hold your marking gauge however you need to, and then come back in and just deepen that pass like this. Of course, you don't have to do it that way. You could lift it up and do it this way. I just find it's a little bit easier leaving it flat down to actually get the marking you want off your reference face there. So that's how I like to do this. So we now have a nice deep line on the bottom here for our depth, and a nice deep line up here for the width. And so if we look here, we can see that this has come in at the exact same depth as the dado here and as the rebate here, which is what we want. So we need to remove this material here. So once again, we do want to mark our waist as usual, so we know which side of the line we want to stay on. I'm going to do this so it's facing you guys. So the first thing I'm doing is going straight to my chisel here. Now, this line that we had across the top here, we want to deepen that line. We want to come in at that 45 degree and we want to push up against that knife line that we have here, and we want to be making this gauge line deeper. So we obviously want to do this all the way along. So let me just quickly do that. So to widen this, you guessed it, we want to come back in with our chisel like this. So we're going to come in, line our chisel up vertical on the little line here, and a couple of little smacks. Now, the reason we did that back cut here gives us enough room to go ahead with the chisel here without pushing it in to the wall, so it's giving us a relief. So we want to come along and use a mallet. So we're just going to come along like this and just do a couple of light taps. What you'll see here is, as I'm doing this to try and keep it aligned, I'm looking down the back of the chisel just here. And that's where my eye is looking to try and line this up as I'm going along, to try and make sure that it's not too far forward, not too far back, but upright. So I'm looking with my eye down here as best I can. So we've now successfully deepened this line along here. We now can come back in once again and come back a little bit further, because we've got much deeper reference, and we're going to reference down once again against that angle and give us a very definitive wall here. So if you need to come back in, just pull the corner of your chisel like that along that line. Try and make sure that material comes out, and maybe get in there with your chisel like this and just flick it out. Sometimes the grain can be a bit stubborn. This back section, and you notice I'm just using body weight to push this. Now if your chisel's not sharp, you might struggle with this process. So you want to make sure your chisel is nice and sharp. And we can just flick this to get that waste out. If you're struggling just with hand pressure to push the chisel like this, what you can do is get your hand in here and just use your body weight behind it like this to actually push and give you that extra weight and pressure that you need. If not, you can always use a mallet. Now, we haven't quite come down the full depth of what we're doing here, so now that we've done this, I'm going to come through with my chisel once more, and I'm not going to back cut that, we don't need to. When you come through those subsequent times, you don't have to worry too much about the alignment of your chisel, because you've already got this really deep alignment and it's going to be pretty easy to find the back of the chisel on it. We should almost be completely at depth there now. It doesn't matter, we'll refine that a little later on after I've removed the waste. So the next step is to remove this waste down to that other knife line. Now to do that, chisel. So we're going to remove the majority of the waste with the chisel. So we're going to come in with the chisel and we're going to start whacking it with the mallet like so to start removing it. Now, one thing you want to do when you're doing this, because you don't want your chisel to go too far down below that baseline, is you want to make sure you're holding it bevel down. So what happens when you hold a chisel bevel down is, when you hit it, the bevel hits, it sort of slides on the bevel and it wants to rock it out of the wood. So you end up with a slightly curved sort of chisel line or chisel cut. And so as it hits, it rolls on that bevel and it tries to push it back out of your material. Just like when you're carving with a flat chisel like that, you go like that and it's going to roll it back out so you don't go too far. If it goes this way, the bevel is going to pull the wood and it's going to want to push it in even further and you go too far. So when you do this, we want bevel down. Keep hitting like this. So you can see as I'm doing this that it's curving these bits out. I'll show you a close-up of the next few strikes so you can see that. You'll also notice that I'm holding the chisel sort of below the handle here. That's so I get much more control on it. I've got plenty of area to hit my handle without smacking my fingers, and I'm sort of holding right in the middle here so it gives a little more support to the chisel, and I'm also holding on a slight angle, and that means that it's exacerbating that sort of angle of the cut so you don't go too far. So you can see now we just want to use our fingers like this and just push that waste off. You could use something else. You could use the side of your chisel if you need to blast this out without damaging your fingers. So if we look across here, we can see that there's a little more material on both these edges here, a little bit less that needs to come off here. So you can go ahead and use more of your chisel as we have done, and I'd recommend that we actually do that, but you're going to have to watch that line a lot more carefully doing that now. Especially in these large areas, we can give it a few more hits and just remove a little more of that mass out of this. So if you have something like this, traditional wooden shoulder plane, or you have any form of shoulder plane, you can now bring that shoulder plane in there, clean the rest of that material up, clean up the shoulder by lying it flat, and you're done. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do this with a chisel, and for the purpose of this video, we're going to continue with the chisel and complete this with the chisel. I want to slowly work my way along, and I want to make sure that my chisel is overhanging the edge a little bit so I can see exactly where it comes down in relation to this line. So I'm going to choke up on it a little bit more here like this, have it hanging over, and I'm watching carefully how far down I'm going to that line. So I'm stopping about, say, 1 millimeter above that line. I'm looking over the top of my work and looking at this line so I can keep an eye on how far it's going the entire way. So you want to make sure that your material is close enough to you, especially if you've got a bad back, that you can actually look over the top of it at that line, or you can have it on your side and you can crouch down and look at it. But this is how I'm doing it. I like to lean over because I find that it just works better and it's easier for me to show you guys. Now once again, we've got this material we need to remove, so as I said, you could use your chisel if you want to, or you can just use your finger to remove it, but if you've got weak fingers, you might want to just use the back of your chisel like this or something else to remove that material. So now, we obviously have to remove more of this material, so what we can do is come in with our chisel, again bevel down, and we can start to work these chips out like this. So as I'm removing this material, I can see here is where we brought that chisel down, so we can see that we're still above that line that we took down, which means that this line where we exacerbated it with the chisel is probably very close to the alignment of this line, this gauge line just here. And we're going to keep working with the chisel this way up. Bevel down. Now if you've already got a dado, you kind of have some bearing of where you need to be. But you want to control this movement. If you have to, choke right up on it like this. Just move slow, you don't want to take too much off at a time. But you can kind of concentrate on your little chisel marks here because we know we didn't go below that line. And for the most part along here, we're still sitting 2 or 3 millimeters above that line. Now, if you're struggling to remove material in that situation, because, okay, you've been hitting on your chisel a little bit, this is just a softwood, but if you're using it in a hardwood, that would take punishment on your chisel, so you might want to come back in. 10 or so strops here, a couple of strops on the back, 2 more, 1, 1, 1, 1, and you should be sharp enough to keep going. If you've ended up getting any sort of digs in the edge of your chisel, you might have to stop and sharpen at this point. Hopefully you haven't, but if you've hit some knots or something hard, or you've got timber like jarrah like I have and it's got a high silicon content, you may require to sharpen that chisel before proceeding in this process, or have a second chisel. So you can see we're going to just keep going like this. Now, see like this, I'm not taking a cutting. Increase the angle a little bit. If it's digging in too much, reduce it a little bit until you actually find the right ability for your chisel and your strength level to push this through. If you haven't got the upper body strength, once again, if you've got it closer, you can use the rest of your body to push through it. So we're still eyeballing this line. We don't want to go too far. We don't want to go below it. But you can see right along here now, we're getting pretty even to the depth. I'm just going to take a little bit more out on this side. And now I can see that we've got pretty even on this line along here all the way. So now that we've got that waste out of the way, we can come in with our chisel flat like this, where we can. Try not to take too much off. Mine's digging in a little too much here, which is not ideal because I'm going against the grain, so it's trying to follow it. If you have that problem, come in like this and flatten it out. We know where that line is, so you can actually put your chisel straight into it like this and push it back. Once again, if you have a wider chisel, this process is a little bit easier. But wherever you've got these high points, we want to just get our chisel into that line and push right through up against this back line here. So now you can actually come in and use this front edge where our gauge line was and register that right back. Just remove that material. So I'm kind of registering through. So I can see I've got too much material here, so I'm going to come a little bit higher just over this edge here. Take some of that waste material down until I can come back in and register here where it's relatively flat. And we're essentially using a chisel to gauge flat right through here like this. Once you've got that, you can come back along this edge here where we did chisel before and just make sure all that material is out of that corner. Even if you undercut this back edge here slightly, it doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that that corner is nice and clean here to reference. If we look over here, we can see we're down to this gauge line. You can still partially see the line because the pencil will have gone partially on the wrong side of it. Some spots we might have taken ever so slightly too much, but it's a fraction of a millimeter. So we can see this now looks flat. So we should have this dado complete. So let's test it. We can see that this board, although it might not be 100% flat, we can see that it's referencing pretty well in here. Turn it around and look at it here, we can see that we've got a pretty clean line across that wall here that we established to start with, which is what we wanted. So let's go ahead, whack a couple of nails into this. So to nail this on, I'm just going to go ahead and start a couple of nails in the middle of our little trench here. And I'm going to line them up as best I can. Try and hold that as square as I can. Once the first nail's in, we'll line the back one up. Try not to bend it over like I just did. Now we've got a couple of nails in there holding it together. We can see that this has come together very nicely. Especially for a rebate that we've done along the grain using just a chisel and a marking gauge essentially. What an amazing ability to do something like this, a back to basics skill, using just two very, very basic tools. I think it's quite amazing to be able to do it. So there you have it, folks. As you can see, with a few very, very simple techniques and the most basic of tools, you can get an awesome looking rebate like this that you could use for the back panel on a cabinet, the bottom of a box, to house a lid on the top of your box. The applications of using a rebate is practically endless if you use your head and think about how you can use them to achieve what you're after. And being able to do it with just a marking gauge and a chisel makes it that much more accessible to you guys, and that's why I wanted to show you this video today, because maybe you're a beginner in the craft and you're not sure if you like it and you want to do a rebate and try it out. You see me use it in a box or something and you want to try it for yourself, but you go, well, I don't have that expensive Philister plane or shoulder plane or something like that. Well, now you don't need those, and there's no barrier for you being able to do what it is that you would like to do, whether you're just starting out or you can't afford them. You can now go ahead and do rebates, whether that's with a saw or with a chisel. And yes, the end rebate, you could definitely do that with a chisel using very similar techniques to what we just did in today's video. But I wanted to sort of separate it and show that you could use a saw for the end grain, which would be the preferred way that you would cut, say, a tenon, which we're going to go into more depth into some tenons and half lap and all of that later on. But if you want to jump ahead, I have already done a video on how to cut a tenon and also a half lap, so you can check those videos out. I'll leave them down below for you. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing down below as always. It really does help the channel out. And if you liked this video and you'd like to support me a little bit more, please consider, while you're down there, giving this video a super thanks if you got some value out of it, or checking me out on Patreon. Links in the description below. If you'd like to see some more videos such as this one, please check out the video up here where I show you how to do a dado using basic hand tools. And also I'll leave the beginner playlist up here that this video will be part of, and I'm also going to leave my woodworking joint playlist up over here, which this video will also be part of. So if you're interested in the dado and half lap, you'll find them there. Bye for now.